Snow fell quietly over the small town of Rivermill, covering the streets in a soft white blanket. Inside a little diner on the corner of Main Street, the lights were warm, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always hot, and the waiter always remembered your name. His name was Marcus. He had worked at that diner for almost 10 years, wiping down counters, refilling cups, and greeting every customer with a gentle smile. He was not a rich man. His apron was old, his shoes were worn, but his heart was full of quiet kindness that no amount of money could buy. One cold winter evening, as the snow grew heavier outside the windows, the bell above the door rang softly. 2 children walked in shivering, their clothes thin and damp from the storm. A boy, about 10 years old, held the hand of his younger sister, who could not have been more than 7. Their cheeks were red from the cold, and their eyes carried a tiredness that no child should know. Marcus looked up from the counter. He noticed the scrape on the boy's cheek, the way the girl's lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. He walked over slowly, careful not to frighten them. "Are you two all right?" he asked gently. The boy, whose name was Ivan, looked down at the floor. "We don't have any money, sir," he said quietly. "We just wanted to get warm for a little while." His sister, Katya, said nothing. She simply held onto her brother's sleeve, her small fingers gripping the fabric like it was the only steady thing in her world. Marcus did not ask more questions. He did not need to. He had seen enough hardship in his own life to recognize it in others. He led them to a seat at the counter, the same seat by the window where the morning light always came in warm and golden. "Sit down," he said. "Let me get you something hot." He brought them 2 bowls of soup, steam rising gently into the cool diner air, and a plate of warm bread beside it. He did not tell his manager. He paid for it himself, from the small tips he had folded into his pocket that day. It was not much, but it was enough. The children ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might disappear. Marcus stood a little distance away, pretending to wipe the counter, giving them space to eat without feeling watched. When Ivan finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he whispered. "Nobody has been this kind to us in a long time." Marcus knelt down beside the counter so he was at eye level with the boy. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Everyone deserves a warm meal on a cold night. That's all this is," he learned, in the quiet conversation that followed, that Ivan and Katya had lost their parents the year before, in an accident on the icy roads outside of town. Since then they had been passed between distant relatives who did not want the burden of 2 more mouths to feed. That night they had simply been walking, with nowhere in particular to go, when they saw the warm light of the diner through the falling snow. Marcus did not have much to offer. He was not wealthy, and he could not take them home, for he lived in a tiny apartment above the hardware store, barely large enough for himself, but he gave them what he could. He gave them warmth, food, and a few words of comfort that would stay with them far longer than the meal itself. Before they left that night, he wrapped a scarf around Katya's neck, the same scarf his own mother had once given him. "Keep warm," he told her, "and remember, this town is not as cold as it feels tonight." The children thanked him again and disappeared into the snow, walking toward the county shelter on the edge of town. Marcus watched them go until they were only shadows against the white street, and then he returned to his work, saying nothing more about it to anyone. Years passed. The diner changed hands twice, though Marcus stayed on, now older, his hair touched with gray, his hands a little slower than before. He still worked the same counter, still poured the same coffee, still greeted every stranger with the same quiet warmth. Life had not made him rich, but it had never made him bitter either. He often thought of the 2 children from that snowy night, wondering where the years had carried them, hoping they had found some kindness of their own. Then, one late afternoon in early spring, 22 years after that winter evening, something unusual happened outside the diner. A long black car pulled up to the curb, its paint so polished it reflected the pale sunlight like a mirror. It was a Rolls-Royce, the kind of car rarely seen in a small town like Rivermill. People on the sidewalk stopped to stare, whispering among themselves, wondering who could possibly be visiting their quiet corner of the world. Inside the diner, Marcus was refilling a customer's cup when the bell above the door rang. He looked up, expecting perhaps a lost traveler or a curious tourist. Instead, he saw a tall man in a dark coat step inside, followed by a woman with a warm, familiar smile. For a moment, Marcus simply stood there, coffee pot in hand, unsure of what he was seeing. The man studied the diner slowly, his eyes moving over the counter, the old wooden stools, the window where morning light always poured in gold. Then his gaze settled on Marcus, and something in his expression softened, as though a memory long buried had suddenly risen to the surface. "Do you remember us?" the man asked quietly. Marcus tilted his head, searching the stranger's face. There was something about the eyes, something about the quiet steadiness in his voice. "I'm sorry," Marcus said slowly. "I don't think I do." The woman stepped forward, and around her neck, faded but carefully kept, was an old scarf. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He knew that scarf. He had given it away on a snowy night, more than 2 decades ago. "Even?" he whispered. "Katya?" The man nodded, his eyes glistening. "You fed us soup on the coldest night of our lives," Ivan said. "You gave us warmth when no one else would even look at us. We never forgot you." Marcus set the coffee pot down slowly, his hands trembling, not from age but from the weight of a memory he thought had been his alone. "You found each other," he said softly. "You're together." "We never stopped looking out for each other," Katya said, her voice thick with emotion. "After that night, a kind family in the next town took us in. We grew up together, we studied hard, and Ivan built a company from nothing. It wasn't easy, but we never forgot where we started, or the man who reminded us that kindness still existed in the world." Ivan reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, placing it gently on the counter. "This diner is yours now," he said. "Not as a loan, not as a gift you need to repay. It is simply our way of saying thank you, for a bowl of soup that changed everything." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. He looked at the envelope, then at the 2 grown faces before him, faces that had once been small and frightened, now strong and full of quiet gratitude. "You didn't have to do this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Neither did you," Katya replied gently. "That's exactly why we did." Outside, the Rolls-Royce waited patiently by the curb, but for a long moment, none of them moved to leave. They simply stood together in the small diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and fresh bread, 3 lives connected by a single act of kindness on a forgotten winter night. As the afternoon light shifted through the window, casting a warm golden glow over the counter, Marcus finally smiled, the same gentle smile he had given 2 frightened children so many years ago. "Sit down," he said softly, echoing the words from that snowy night. "Let me get you something warm." And for the first time in over 20 years, Marcus served a meal not out of duty but out of joy, knowing that one small act of kindness, given freely and without expectation, had quietly changed 3 lives forever.